Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Mats Engman. I work as a military fellow at the Institute for Security and Development Policy, who is together with the Korea Defense Veterans Association hosting today's event on peace and stability in Northeast Asia amidst US-China strategic competition. I would like to welcome all our attendees and especially, of course, our four eminent speakers of today. The structure we intend to try to follow for today is I will make a short introduction and then we'll have about 10 minutes for each of the panelists to make the presentations. And then we intend to have a session with the panelists asking questions to each other, and I may also ask a few questions. And after that, we'll open the floor for questions from our audience. And for our audience, if you would like to pose a question, please use the Q&A function on the button on your Zoom platform. The strategic competition between China and the United States has intensified, increasing the risk of unintended incidents and confrontation, and also narrowed the space for cooperation, both regionally and globally. It affects us here in Europe, and of course in Northeast Asia in particular. Northeast Asia has also seen a stark increase in military buildups and an increase in assertive national policies. Lately, we have also read about the establishment of a new trilateral alliance between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, maybe signaling a more collective and comprehensive security thinking. This has put countries like South Korea and Japan that have a long-standing partnership with both the United States and China between a rock and a hard place, and made them pursue different strategies. Addressing the issue of denuclearization and peace on the Korean Peninsula is likewise affected by this US-China rivalry. South Korea has pursued a policy of selective cooperation with China on a range of issues, trying to capitalize on the country's identity as a middle power. Japan as well has tried to leverage China's economic growth while maintaining its reliance on the United States for its national security. All these four countries, the US, China, the Republic of Korea, and Japan, seems to be at a crossroad in their relations. Inaction is maybe not an option, and balanced and calculated strategies are the only solution to avoid further and more damaging frictions. So far, both Tokyo and Seoul have avoided becoming trapped in an overly adversarial relationship with China, while limiting any dilution of the alliance credibility with the United States. But will this policy work, looking ahead? These and many more issues will be discussed at today's webinar with the guidance of our eminent speaker. I will introduce our speakers one by one as they are invited to speak, and I would like to start with Mr. Garlukas. Mr. Garlukas is an independent author and consultant specializing in Northeast Asian security issues and strategic analysis. He is also a non-resident senior fellow with the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security with the Atlantic Council. He has several years of service in the Republic of Korea at the United Nations Command and the Combined Forces, where he was head of the intelligence estimate branch at J2. He has also been a national intelligence officer responsible for North Korea at the National Intelligence Council in Washington. He is a security and defense expert with a special focus on the Indo-Pacific and Korea. And with this short introduction, please, Mr. Garlukas, the floor is yours.
So thanks for this opportunity, both to the ISDP, but also to the Korea Defense Veterans Association. I particularly want to thank Colonel Steve Lee Colonel Retired Steve Lee of the KDVA for bringing me into this session, and then of course to you, General Langman, for providing that introduction and for moderating today's session. So before I get started, I'd like to emphasize up front that the comments I'm sharing today, of course, are my own views, and they don't represent any organization that I've been affiliated with, past or present. But let me begin the substance of my remarks by saying I think the overall title here and the concept is a really truly important topic. This idea of looking at peace and stability in Northeast Asia amidst U.S.-China strategic competition. I think this is really critical for looking ahead at the future environment in East Asia. But honestly, I prefer the competition to the term competition. I prefer the term rivalry, because I think it actually has a connotation that better describes what we'll be seeing in the years ahead and captures some of those dynamics that General Langman, you just alluded to. Competition sounds orderly and logical and maybe even a little bit linear, whereas rivalry is a much more fluid concept. And it's where those old terms that we've talked about for millennia of fear, honor, and interest, they get all entangled together. And entangled, I think that's a good word to describe what we're talking about here in Northeast Asia in the years ahead. And in these conversations, I think in particular, it's important to come to terms with how much China and North Korea have become strategically entangled, even if there's not a whole lot of trust between the two. And I think they're going to pose increasingly inextricable challenges to stability as China continues to shield North Korea from the consequences of the pursuit of its more advanced nuclear and missile capabilities. And then, of course, as the Korean Peninsula becomes an increasing venue for the expression of U.S.-China strategic rivalry. And so for a long time, I think some of you may be familiar with my work, that I've advocated for the idea of to take an effective approach to the challenges posed by North Korea. It's inseparable from taking a productive approach toward China. And meanwhile, I also don't think that you can separate Korea, North or South, from the context of U.S.-China strategic rivalry. And so I may be a strategist by mindset. And General Langman, you left out, I also ran the strategy division in the J5 and the U5 for UN Command, U.S. Forces Korea, and Combined Forces Command. So I'm also really a strategist. And I'm an intelligence officer, of course, by profession for a lot of my career. But when it comes down to it, all that is informed by being a historian at heart. So when I heard some people earlier this year kind of wave away Korea in terms of its interest in as a priority for the new U.S. administration, I kept hearing the refrain that the U.S. has got to focus on China, even at the expense of Korea, and that North Korea really doesn't matter in comparison to China as a challenge to security and stability in Northeast Asia. Well, the historian in me kind of laughs at that sort of framing. This is like saying to President Kennedy when he takes office in 1961, you've got to focus on the Soviet Union, don't focus on Germany or on Cuba. They don't really matter. Of course, that's where the two big crises with the Soviets ended up taking place, with, of course, the Berlin crisis of 61 and then the Cuban Missile Crisis. Anyway, obviously, as you can tell, I've got a lot of thoughts about the subject, but General, you wanted us to keep the remarks to about 10 minutes. So to keep the rest of my presentation sufficiently brief, I'm going to raise only two main points and that lead to questions on issues that I think have been underappreciated. The first is how the PRC, despite signing on to unprecedented sanctions in 2017, is enabling and excusing the destabilizing behavior of North Korea since then. This is a problematic dynamic, and what is it going to take to work together to get that to stop? And then second, this potential for a U.S. PRC military confrontation in and around Korea. Why this could take place and how we can really examine this more seriously to prevent this very dangerous possibility from happening. So first, in this question of the challenge of stability posed by the PRC's policy of shielding North Korea from the consequences of his actions and aiding and abetting North Korea's defiance of UN Security Council resolutions. This is really getting to be even more visible now that it's reached the point that Beijing, along with Moscow, are blocking even the most basic and pro forma condemnation of the North Korean weapons tests that are very clearly proscribed by UN resolutions. It doesn't require additional research or additional assessment to be able to look very objectively at what North Korea has done this month in terms of weapons testing, to be able to say these are violations of the UN Security Council resolutions. They are proscribed actions testing weapons that fall within the scope of what's prohibited, and in particular, the nuclear capable systems and ballistic missile systems. So now this is something that's very disappointing, because in 2017, of course, when North Korea was conducting a rash of weapons testing, Beijing certainly signed up for some very strong sanctions, but the enforcement was lagging, and so there were a lot of people who were saying, hey, let's give it time. But I think back then there was an understandable optimism that the pressure internationally was going to build on North Korea, and this was going to get North Korea to change path. However, the track record now is pretty consistent that China has been allowing for years systematic violations of sanctions. Still, this isn't just about some trade trickling across the border or some humanitarian items which are not prohibited. This also is really important to consider in the context of the fact that the COVID lockdown that North Korea has undertaken is actually doing more to restrict the flow of prohibited trade in and out of North Korea, more so than any enforcement of sanctions could be. And there's clear evidence, repeated evidence of China allowing large amounts of refined petroleum products to go into North Korea by sea, and large amounts of coal to come out in violation of the sanctions that were passed by the Security Council in 2017. And this isn't some kind of secret. This is very well known. You have some great detailed analysis being published by places like Project Sandstone out of the Royal United Services Institute in London, and by C4ADS and RAND in the US, among many other organizations, and of course, reporting in the press on these sorts of violations. And so this is really problematic for stability, not only because it provides resources that the Kim regime uses for this ballistic missile and nuclear development to provide the resources for the sorts of development and testing that it just has been recently conducting, but also this signals to the Kim regime that ultimately, even if Beijing officially opposes Pyongyang's nuclear and ballistic missile development, in practicality, Beijing is going to tolerate it. It's not enough just for Beijing to take a pro forma stance against these programs and urge North Korea to come into line with the resolutions and to denuclearize. It can't just simply be these occasional pro forma condemnations. North Korea has to face the unanimous pressure and condemnation from the international community whenever it commits a flagrant violation of these the resolutions. And further, the bar can't be set that anything short of an ICBM or a nuclear test is just fine, despite what the UN Security Council resolutions say. All of these sorts of tests build toward development of the capabilities that, again, are proscribed unanimously by the UN Security Council. And so as long as Pyongyang has the impression essentially that China is going to say one thing, and the international community in some sense is going to say one thing and then do another, it's going to be very problematic for stability. And of course, it's going to make it impossible to really rein in North Korea's programs, much less achieve denuclearization. So that's my first concern of how this fits together with U.S.-China strategic competition rivalry, because my concern is that this continuing downward trend in the relationship in U.S.-China makes it even less likely that Beijing is going to change path and cease continuing to essentially underwrite at least partially North Korea's weapons programs. And then on my second point, on the need to look more carefully at the risk of a direct US-PRC military confrontation in and around the Korean Peninsula. How do we prevent that? Now, analysts and military leaders and policymakers looking at the potential flashpoints in East Asia for US-PRC conflict and how to prevent it, well, they've had an overriding focus on Taiwan recently. You can see that from looking at the media. And more generally over time, there's been a focus in the South China Sea as the potential flashpoint for such a conflict. And I think we all get it, given what President Xi has been saying and all of the air activity around Taiwan lately. It's easy to draw your attention, and it's easy, frankly, to envision the PRC moving toward trying to settle the Taiwan issue by force. And this is a hard problem, right? But it's a fairly simple problem. I think other than scenarios where Taiwan does something, say formally declaring independence, any scenario of war over Taiwan is essentially a war of choice on Beijing's part. It's not something that it's going to be forced into. And so there's a debate on how likely Beijing is to make this choice and how such a choice can be avoided. But frankly, I think it's also something that though we should continue to examine, it's fairly binary, right? Taipei is part of the equation, sure, but the lines are pretty clear. You've only got two nuclear powers involved, the PRC and the United States. And ultimately, though, again, this is a war of choice for Beijing if it decides to push a war over Taiwan. Beijing picks the time, and if they start to see the time's not right, they can simply wait. Meanwhile, the potential for a conflict or a crisis originating in Korea, it's entirely different. And I think it's under-examined in the public discourse. You read these reports from Rand, you read Graham Allison's, a very important book, Destined for War. And there's a basic acknowledgement in many of these places that a US PRC war could be sparked in Korea, but it gets explored very little in comparison to other scenarios. The pathway to get there, of course, is a bit more convoluted. It's a bit more indirect. So it's harder to envision, it's harder to warn about, and I don't think it gets taken as seriously as a result. But preventing a PRC US military confrontation in around Korea is really a far more complex challenge, since there's a nuclear armed and potentially unstable North Korea right in the middle of this situation as potentially the starting point. The US and the PRC could be dragged into a military confrontation by the actions in North Korea or by internal events in North Korea. And more broadly, this whole area, as General Engman, as you pointed out, is a whole set of converging interests and deteriorating trust. And so you've got four nuclear armed states in the mix right in this area. You got the PRC, North Korea, Russia, and the United States, plus two very heavily armed US allies, the ROK and Japan. So a crisis or a conflict there could start with a choice, a miscalculation in Pyongyang. It doesn't take place in Beijing or Washington or even Seoul or Tokyo. North Korea initiates aggression, and then the situation spins out of control. And then all of these players have to react. Perhaps South Korea right there on the peninsula reacts first, and then the US and the PRC and others responding to those reactions. And so this could escalate into a major confrontation. It could also start with an internal event, not even a choice by North Korea. Kim Jong-un has an accident, it's a health crisis, lone wolf assassin, and then what? Could there be a smooth succession? Okay, sure, but you also have the potential for a crisis and even a fragmentation of control of nuclear weapons. This would be really devastating potentially to security and stability in Northeast Asia. So there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of complexity as you got all these countries scrambling to protect their interests in a crisis, all in the context of US-China strategic rivalry. It'd be tough to manage, again, since there's really not that much trust between the United States and the PRC, and then of course among a lot of the other players in the area, including of course North and South. So bottom line, should we be concerned about the possibility of a US PRC war emerging over the Taiwan issue? Yes, sure we should. But it doesn't mean that we just gloss over the possibility that an internal event in North Korea or a conflict initiated by North Korea could very quickly drag the US and the PRC into a really complex confrontation that ends up centering on nuclear weapons. And that's the one with all these unknowns. And so I really think that's the one that should be keeping us up at night and having us pondering the possibilities and figuring out how to mitigate the risk of this potential conflict, and not as much focusing on Taiwan, which again is a hard problem, but one I think that we understand and we come to grips with much more regularly. So I'll leave it there on that ominous note, and I thank you very much again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Marcus, to put us on a very good track here. And one of the I won't ask you a question here. I'll wait until the other speakers have had to say. But one thing that crosses my mind listening to you is this lack of a really well worked through kind of crisis management structure in the area in order to mitigate the risks of those unintended incidents and conflicts that you alluded to. So maybe we can compact that to that during the Q&A session. And I'd like to invite Dr. Li Nan as our next speaker. Dr. Li Nan is a senior fellow at the Pangol Institute and associate research fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Science Institute of American Studies. Dr. Nan holds a PhD in national strategy from the Renmin University of China. He has also had several stints of visiting scholar at the Seoul National University, the Brookings Institute, Johns Hopkins, and also Kim Il-sung University in Pyongyang. His main focus is North Korean-US relations and China-North Korea relations. So please, Dr. Nan, the word is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And also, I'm not an expert on military issue, and I like to share my view on current situation of Korean Peninsula and DPRK's recent behavior. And in my personal observation, and I think the Biden policy toward Korean Peninsula has produced effect, in the Korean Peninsula already. So if we can make tours for the policy, it will be the alliance first. So Biden administration's DPRK policy emphasizes a dialogue with DPRK in a practical approach, that is to increase the security of the United States and the alliance. And the way US trying to engage with DPRK is to, according to the White House statement, is to have and will continue to consult with the Republic of Korea, Japan, and the other allies and partners at every step along the way. So in its policy review on DPRK, it has repeatedly mentioned the consultation and the cooperation with its alliance. In fact, the Biden administration's policy on DPRK is based on the consolidation of the US East Asian alliance. So the positive side of this policy is the US has widely accepted many of statements of Moon Jae-in government North Korean policies, such as in using the phrase, the complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, even considering scrapping the controversial ROK-US working group, trying to establish DPRK-US relations on the basis of the Singapore joint statement. But also the negative side is also huge. So first one, no any specific plan for the roadmap for North Korea amendment of nuclear weapon, and no any proposal for the sanction relief, and also put forward the human rights issue on DPRK. I have to say, if the Biden administration continues to stick to the Singapore Declaration, US DPRK dialogue will likely continue in some form. If, on the other hand, the US and the ROK upgrade the large-scale military exercise, increase the import of high-tech weapons to the Korean Peninsula, and expand economic sanction against DPRK, the latter will drop any hope of engagement and shut down the window for the negotiation. If so, the uncertainty of the peninsula will be increasing up. No hope for the North Korean nuclear issue addressed. Unfortunately, now I think the door is being closed. So Kim made a speech on the 5th session of 14th Superior People's Assembly. He noticed the current international situation is mainly characterized by the fact it has got more complicated as the structure of the international relations has been reduced to the structure of new Cold War. Pointing out the Biden policy toward DPRK, he said the US is talking about diplomatic engagement and deep dialogue without precondition, but it's no more than a petty trick for deceiving the international community and hiding its hostile act and the extension of the hostile policy pursued by the successive US administrations. So first of all, from the statement, we can see, first of all, DPRK has made a judgment, the China-US competition and the international situation as a new Cold War. And the new Cold War from the North Koreans' eyes have been formed. Secondly, DPRK will on the opposition of the US side. So any US act toward DPRK has been regarded as the extension of the hostile policy pursued by successive US administrations. So in my opinion, DPRK has already shut down the window for US already. but leaving a very tiny door for ROK. So I think the DPRK strategy under the judgment of the new Cold War situation will be like, first one, North Korea will more rely on China and Russian. So currently, the DPRK is fully committed to breaking through the economic bottleneck caused by the sanction and the COVID, and will lean more on China and Russia for its economic recovery. And moreover, the threat being faced by China in the East Asia will be regarded as a threat the DPRK facing. Just like recently, DPRK officially criticized AUKUS, also in the past criticized Quad. So it looks like China thinks the AUKUS and Quad is charges against China, but our North Korea DPRK thinking this is also against North Korea. So North Korea and China, it looks like in the same front line. And so recently, Kim Jong-un sent a message of greeting Xi Jinping, President Xi, for the 72th anniversary of PRC. And in this message, he mentioned, so North Korea, DPRK government will formally support Chinese party government and people to defeat the hostile force, frantic anti-China confrontational moves. So even China never called US as hostile forces, and the DPRK trying to use this word and showing to China, then we are facing the same hostile forces. So trying to be closer to China. Even China never take this hostile forces officially. Okay, so secondly, I think North Korea will be very cautious about re-engagement with ROK. Right now, North Korea leaving a very tiny door for ROK, but I think they will be very hard to change their negative view on ROK. And the third, so North Korea will keep upgrading the conventional military system, and we can see an arms race will be looming up in Korean Peninsula. So right now, North Korea recently tested a new long-range cruise missiles. So hypersonic glider was one of the near-term modernization objectives. And Kim Jong-un laid out at the 8th Party Congress of the Working Party Korea in January 2021. According to the military expert, this represents a very serious development on Korean Peninsula, making it considerably more difficult for ROK and the US to execute the preemptive strike against the North Korean missile launches. So this demonstration is certainly the most significant to the date for ongoing post-8th Party Congress 5-year plan. And lastly, I think North Korea will reduce the risk of the crisis with ROK. I think North Korea trying to having crisis management with ROK because today North Korea restart the hotline for the with ROK. I think the main reason or the one of the important reason is to trying to reduce the crisis and to taking the crisis management. Because from North Korea's perspective, during the Cold War, any crisis will possible make a larger conflict, even war run by the great powers. So North Korea definitely trying to prevent it. So if the judgment is right, the North Korean define the international as a new Cold War already. So they will take Cold War thinking to take their position, especially among the bureaucratic system. But the reality is China and the US officially never accepted this scenario and always calling to prevent the new Cold War. So this means the countries in the region should work together to prevent it. If we cannot achieve the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula in short term, so the parties, I think, should maintain an amicable atmosphere beneficial to the talks. For instance, encouraging the promotion of relations between the two Korea and engaging in dialogue and communication regarding academic humanitarian with DPRK. This is my thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nan. Even though many of your interventions were rather pessimistic, I found at least one small little token of hope. And you mentioned that you believe that North Korea is maybe positively trying to improve crisis management on the peninsula, and maybe something we can come back to during the Q&A is, do you think this is also a kind of precursor for a better implementation of the comprehensive military agreement on the peninsula? So I leave you with that at the moment and ask Mr. Zucchini to join us as our next speaker. Mr. Zucchini is currently a special advisor for operation policy and strategy at the JBIC, the Japanese Bank of International Cooperation. He is former director of the Policy and Strategy Office for Financial Operations at the same bank, the JBIC, and also a senior advisor to the Corporate Planning Department at JBIC. Mr. Zucchini's research focus is geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific region and the future geopolitical implication of climate change. So we have a person with some kind of economic expertise and background with us today. So please, over to you, Mr. Zucchini.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm pleased to be here to discuss this very important issue with other panelists. I would like to share my personal observation from Japanese perspective about a very wider geopolitical landscape in the region. My opinion is my personal one, and my opinion doesn't represent the opinion of JBIC or other institution. First of all, last month, North Korea has been quite active in its missile testing, including ballistic missile and hypersonic missile, regardless of real capability of such new weapon. A series of action is enough to increase risk awareness in the region. To this situation, as Marcus mentioned, the international community is very reluctant to drive North Korea into a corner, but rather wait and see was an option or selection. Even though ballistic missile testing clearly violates UN Security Council's resolution, UN Security Council failed to deliver a collective message. This situation pushes US, Japan, and South Korea to tighten the communication. Furthermore, the threat stimulates Japanese domestic discussion over if Japan upgrades its missile defense system and needs to enhance its offensive military capability to deter the missile attacks. Together with the tension of South and East China Sea, Japanese national defense budget may exceed 1% of GDP. That is historically treated as a limit by government's policy. The recent unstable security situation in the region drives competition and the military capability. Although direct impact of instability in the Northeast Asia is not small, it is more important to look at much wider geopolitical dynamics having impacts on US, Japan, China, and South Korea. I think that the global security focus has moved very quickly for the recent years, and the geopolitical landscape is not the same as we observed before. First, center of gravity in geopolitics as well as geoeconomics is shifting to the Indo-Pacific. AUKUS, new security partnership between Australia, the UK, and the US is the most recent evidence of the shift of geopolitical attention. Japan has advanced its free open Indo-Pacific initiative to maintain sustainability and protect rule-based international order. The strategy includes not only security cooperation, but also economic cooperation with other like-minded partners that can share common visions. For example, Quad cooperation has been originally developed for defense cooperation, but later focus has been shifted to economic cooperation, including vaccine cooperation for COVID-19 and infrastructure development cooperation. UK-Japan cooperation has also demonstrated the progress both in defense cooperation, including British aircraft carriers' visit to Japan, and in economic cooperation, including comprehensive economic partnership agreement signed last year. EU also developed its own Indo-Pacific strategy that was announced last month. The strategy focuses more on the economic-related activities, although the strategy describes enhanced naval deployments by EU member states to help protect the sea line of communication and freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific, while boosting Indo-Pacific partners' capability to ensure maritime security. In addition to the shift of gravity in geopolitics, the rule of game for the global leadership is also changing. The competition is over how global leaders can address the global challenges, particularly the urgent challenges that developing economies are facing. Vaccine diplomacy is one of examples. I think historically, such cooperation has been led by multilateral institutions such as the World Bank and WHO and so on. But recently, the role seems to be partially replaced by bilateral framework or small groupings such as G7. The concept of economic statecraft, where the country uses economic means to achieve diplomatic goals, seems to obtain popularity in building foreign policy in recent years. Japan's new Kishida administration established new minister responsible for integrating national security and economic objectives. This function is quite important under the current tension of global competition over how the government can build its strategic combination of national security program and economic program. Amid aforementioned global security situation and game change over global leadership, Japan seems to regain its strategic presence in international community through proactive coordination under the concept of free open Indo-Pacific and visible economic cooperation across the Indo-Pacific, backed by its industrial power and long-standing economic ties in the region. Such Japanese new position and strengthened strategic partnership with allies will possibly contribute to maintaining power balance with China. This creates a space for Japan to play a key role in security issues in Northeast Asia. Regarding China and Japan economic cooperation, despite the backdrop of decoupling between China and US, including allies of both countries, economic ties between two countries, Japan and China, is very strong over a wide range of industries. Although some strategic areas such as semiconductor industries or others related to national security might be decoupled in the next decades, most industries are expected to continue its industrial cooperation. Both countries benefit from such industrial cooperation, and hence, industrial community pushes its government to take soft approach even under US-China strategic competition. Such pressure hopefully contributes to preventing extreme hard approach and maintaining geopolitical stability in Northeast Asia. My worry is military assertive action in East and South China Sea stimulates hostile sentiment in the community, and finally overwhelms the voice from industrial community. I don't see any signals of such direction at the moment, but I maintain my worry. The political tension between Japan and South Korea is another concern, actually. I cannot find any quick solution to ease the tension, but Japan refreshed its leadership and South Korea will have new leadership in the next spring. Can we expect any improvement of relationship between two countries? I will share the result of one survey, a joint survey conducted by Japanese think tank Genron NPO and Korean think tank East Asia Institute. Was newly established last month, which revealed that both Korea and Japan had low expectations for the improvement of Korea-Japan relationships in the next administration. In the case of Korea, 48% of the respondents said that Korea-Japan relations will not improve during the next administration, and 52% of the respondents responded the same in Japan. To avoid extreme situation in Northeast Asia, crisis management is truly important. I think US, Japan, and South Korea maintains its channel to exchange views of military tension of North Korea, which functioned as a series of missile testing by North Korea. But in order to create new steps to further stabilize the security situation in Northeast Asia, mutual trust among stakeholders, Japan, US, South Korea, and China, is indispensable, very needed. Without such trust, it is not possible to draw a blueprint how we step forward to have a stable security situation in Northeast Asia, including North Korea. That's why we have to build mutual trust through some dialogue or frank communication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zucchini. And maybe we can come back to you and the other panelists afterwards to see if could Japan play a role with its economic relations with China as a facilitator, moderator, in order to achieve what you just alluded to and expressed important kind of crisis management or more trust between the parties in this part of the world. Our last speaker of today is Professor Han. Professor Han is currently, in fact, a visiting fellow at ISDP Stockholm Korea Center and is also Professor Emeritus of Korea National Defense University in the Republic of Korea, where he also served as the Vice President between 2010 and 12. He was also the initiator and launcher of the Korea Nuclear Policy Society and served as its first president from 2012 to 15. Professor Han holds a PhD of Security Policy of RAND Graduate School of the RAND Corporation in the United States, and his research focus is defense policy making, arms control, alliance management, non-proliferation, and North Korean denuclearization and East Asian security. So with that, Professor Han, please, the word is yours.
Thank you very much, General Engelmann, and I learned a lot from my previous presenters, and because I am at the ISDP, I did homework one question after one question. So I tried to make a PowerPoint, but today nobody is showing PowerPoints, but I just within 10 minutes I will skip something, but I'll show you my okay. Actually, since 2001, I prepared how to promote regional security cooperation, including arms control in North Asia, as well as denuclearization of North Korea. And during the 6-by talks, it was going on very well, but we reached a stalemate. And now USDPRK talks, summit talks came in to rescue the process, but still we are meeting with the deadlock. So having said that, I have just 2 points to make regarding the general arms race atmosphere in Northeast Asia and also the North Korean denuclearization issue. So if you look at the military trends in Northeast Asia, missile arms race is continuing. I think initiated by China and North Korea. North Korea is, you know everything about North Korea and conducting missile tests from short range to intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have a panoply of all kinds of missiles and still testing. And the main concern raised by China is that China has been developing SRBM and IRBM of land to surface to Navy missiles, including DF-21 and DF-26. That is kind of using the opportunity that China was left behind of the INF Treaty. And recently, Russia, United States, and China are developing hypersonic guided vehicles and missiles, which add to the increasing arms race in this region. So I think on top of that, naval arms race is happening. And if you look at 2030, the number of Chinese submarine fleets will be more than United States in the Indo-Pacific. And I saw the increasing Chinese naval power to get a power projection capabilities beyond the second island chain. That proposes threat to the United States Navy and between United States and China, already naval arms race is happening. So given the arms race is going on, and I think it's the new initiative taken by the United States in proposing the AUKUS, allowing Australia to have a nuclear submarine. So in that connection, we need, I think, first, 3 countries, United States, China, and Russia, should have some discussion mechanism how to address the increasing missile arms race, problem of increasing arms race. Given that the INF Treaty has been expired by the United States and Russia, and the medium-range missiles development is going on, and together with the China's deployment of IRBM, MRBMs in this region, and I think 3 countries should come up with some kind of arms control regime to mitigate global concerns of this how this serious arms race will give some serious implications for other security concerns. And in addition to that, and North Korea increasing all kinds of MLBM, ILBM, and ICBM and SLBM capabilities. And with regard to this problem, South Korea recently entered into missile competition with North Korea after the ban on missile range development was lifted by United States President Biden in May. And we want to develop the defensive capabilities vis-a-vis North Korea's offensive capabilities. But here in people's just looking at the inter-Korean problem, only saying that, to ease tension and build confidence between the two Koreas, South Korea should take initiative and, restrain from importing US advanced weapons. But that's not the topic related to this context, We are not importing intermediate range missiles or nuclear weapons. So this advanced weapon is just for conventional military weapon to deter and defend against North Korea's attacks. So that is not closely related to this arms race or arms control. So we should separate this issue from this missile control regime we are talking about. And another issue is about the North Korean nuclear issue. I think because of the deadlock between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, we cannot go, back to, or we can hardly resume the USDPRK talks because North Korea is rejecting the action level meeting other than summit, and also Kim Jong-un personally having image damage of his image as a North Korea's president, and deep frustration with dealing with the United States. So he has no incentive to go over to the action level meeting with the United States. And then having said that, this process, we need to go over again and what alternative we can continue on to address the denuclearization issue of North Korea. We have to, as an expert, I think, we have to analyze the 6-by talks, and because before the 6-by talks came in, the Geneva Agreed Framework directed talks between US and DPRK has broken down, and what could be alternative at that time. 6 countries gathered together, and the leaders thought about how to rescue this negotiation process. And China took a leading role and mediating role in providing, not only providing good offices to the 6-by talks, but also played a constructive and mediating role in matching and some proposing compromise between the United States and North Korea. So we failed in reading Kim Jong-un's utmost top priority. It was lied in the attainment of a nuclear weapon state, whatever price he will take. Also, based on the recent January 2021 Party Congress report, for North Korea, they achieved the nuclear weapon state. So by their interpretation, their nuclear weapon status was recognized by US President Trump. And without any negotiation, if it continues on for several years, then their status, nuclear weapons status will be recognized, in fact. So they don't see any benefit, regardless what will happen in the future in the negotiation. They see the earning time for more several years. In fact, they will be the status of nuclear weapon state will be recognized by, as a matter of fact, it will be recognized by the world community. So that's their calculation. And we need to think about, how can you accomplish denuclearization? So we need a kind of a 6-5 talks again. I think in this connection, I think because US and DPRK has been in deadlock, who can make a leading role in rescuing this negotiation process? I think China, is in a good position to do this kind of thing, which will show China's constructive and a visionary role in showing to the world and the North Asian countries that China is as a great power. It is as a responsible great power. China is on the one side, the China-United States competition is going on, but China has some kind of constructive role in maintaining the NPT regime and also the kind of pursuing peaceful solution for the very critical problem of North Korean nuclear weapons. So this is the suggestion. And also prospects for regional security cooperation. In addition to some kind of 6-5 talks, we need to resume that kind of 6-5 talks. And also, we have to think about the regional security cooperation. I think countries in North Asia should review what has been achieved and what has not been achieved during the past decades to promote regional security cooperation, multilateral security cooperation. I think South Korea, Japan, China, and other countries tried to 6-5 talks and multilateral security cooperation in the various venue that they feel very comfortable to pursue with. But we have to go over again, because in general, the US-China competition is going on, and big rivalry is going on. Then our small powers, middle powers squeezed between the two great powers. We are very maintain low profile in security areas, but that's one side. But on the other hand, we have to look for the opportunity. And first, Seoul and Tokyo need to cooperate to dilute the tension between Beijing and Washington and promote a regional or Asia-Pacific conference on security and cooperation in attempts to apply the European CBMs to region. It has had been done during the beginning of the 21st century, but now it's stopped. But anyway, we have to resume that effort. And also Beijing.
So can I remind you of the time, please?
Yeah, this is the last sentence I have to say.
Oh,
that.
sorry.
Beijing, Seoul, Tokyo needs a revitalized trilateral cooperation secretariat. Its activity was primarily focused on softer issues, but at this time we have to include the hard issues such as security issues. On a regular basis, we have to talk about that, and without this progress, trilateral progress on these security issues, we cannot, expect the weakening U.S.-China rivalry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hahn, and hope you can close your PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you. And I would now like to start with asking our four speakers if you would like to make a comment on what your colleagues have said or pose a question to any of them. If anyone wants to comment or pose a question to one another. Okay, if not, I would like to ask a question to some of you. We are talking about a rivalry between US and China in this part of the world and how it may affect countries like Japan and South Korea. And so far, both Japan and South Korea seems to have been able to balance their position vis-a-vis both United States and China. But we also see an increase in alliance building efforts from United States with the Quad and now lately with the AUKUS trilateral alliance. And it may possibly imply an increased pressure to Seoul and Tokyo in siding more clearly with United States and thereby indirectly also maybe distance themselves to Beijing. So maybe if I would ask Mr. Zucchini and Professor Hahn, could you say if this is a sentiment that is shared in Tokyo and Seoul, and if politicians are feeling a little bit, let's say, nervous about having to make this really difficult choice? And also to you, Mr. Garlaukas, do you think that this is my kind of painting of the picture correct, that the United States is putting more emphasis on alliance building in the region? So may I ask you, Mr. Zucchini, to start, please?
Thank you very much for your good question. As I mentioned during my presentation, now Japan is focusing on every effort to maintain the stabilization throughout the Indo-Pacific region. Of course, the Indo-Pacific is one of the priority of the US and other countries. That's one of the reasons why Japan tried to play a key role in leading the economic activities or security cooperation across the Indo-Pacific. With such strengthened trust with the US, I think the Japanese leadership understand that the economic ties with China is very strong, and industry requires government to take a soft approach. And also China understands the important presence of Japanese industry in the region. I think we can seek for very common objective to work together in the economic area. So in that space, I personally believe that the Japanese government understand the US could understand the situation of Japan in the economic region, building on the mutual trust between Japan and US. So as a conclusion, I think that Japanese government believes they can create enough space to take free action in the economic area together with China, and China will do the same.
Okay, Professor Hahn, is this a ongoing debate in Seoul about possible having to make a more articulated choice between relations to China and relations to the United States? You are muted, Professor Hahn.
It is hotly debated inside Korea whether we have to say clearly whether we are on the US side or on the China side. But anyway, South Korea has been maintaining policy of ambiguity as to whether we are on US side or on China side. While we are, we rely on China for economy, and while relying on security on the United States, that was some kind of conventional wisdom. And but Moon Jae-in government a little bit went a step further to be seen as a kind of leaning toward China and North Korea, apart from United States, traditional alliance with the United States. Why Moon Jae-in government wanted some kind of breakthrough in the peace building process with North Korea, so kind of staying a little bit aloof from United States. But this strategy didn't work. So on top of that, the most recent case of a sad dispute with China, South Korea, for fear of North Korean nuclear attack, nuclear weapons, we had nothing but to introduce THAAD in protection our security. But China meddled in domestic and South Korean domestic politics, and Chinese ambassador in Korea is intervening in internal politics of South Korea and showing some assertive statement and also some limited range of economic sanctions on South Korea. Because of that, South Korean people now realize we should not be a kind of aloof from the alliance, and for the security and defense, we have to say some explicitly say something about we are pursuing our security and defense with alliance with the United States. And also on the issue of THAAD or missiles and North Korean nuclear weapons, I think South Korea should be make clear about our security policy. Its backbone is based on the alliance. So if China doesn't like this, or in China, on economy, we are mutually beneficial. Trade is mutually beneficial. We are keeping close relations with China, but on security, we have to make clear about our position, not remaining in the ambiguous position.
Thank you, Professor Hahn. May I also remind our attendees that you are very welcome to write questions for our four speakers using the Q&A function on the bottom of your Zoom platform. So please do that, and I'll try to pick them up in the order they come. But now over to you, Mr. Garukas. Is US pressuring or improving their alliance building efforts in the region?
Yes, no, I think absolutely alliances are a focus of the new administration, and I think alliances are absolutely critical to not only U.S. national security, but really to the stability of the region. And buttressing, reinforcing, and strengthening those alliances is important. It's not a matter of pressure; it's a matter of encouragement and outreach and reinvigorating support and confidence in those alliances. But as it relates to this issue of where Japan and ROK stand vis-a-vis the US and China. I really want to echo some of the things that Dr. Han just mentioned, and also make the point that the US also has a very strong economic relationship, really a critical economic relationship with China, yet the United States is quite willing and able to stand up to Chinese bullying and coercion. And I think one of the concerns that I keep seeing over and over again is this idea that China is trying to use a mutually beneficial, as Dr. Han said, trade relationship with their country to try and leverage that to then force it to act more in line with China's interests. And this is really not this is not really appropriate behavior under the international norms. And frankly, it's also a bluff, right? China cannot cut off of its economic relationships with all the countries that don't behave the way it wants to, because if it did, its own economy would collapse. And so I think we need to keep in mind again that many countries in the world have strong economic ties with China, but that shouldn't preclude them from being allies to each other and allies with the United States when it comes to important security issues. And it should not prevent them from, as Dr. Han pointed out, taking necessary actions to enhance their own security and to deal with threats from countries like North Korea, simply because the Chinese object, because Beijing, I should say, objects to the way in which they've chosen to secure their national interests. So I don't think being closely economically tied to China and being a close ally of the United States are necessarily mutually exclusive. And I think the other point I'd raise too is there's still very significant economic relationships, and I would argue growing and vibrant economic relationships between both Japan and the ROK and the United States. And the US is not using those economic relationships to try and manipulate or leverage and coerce South Korea, Japan, or similar relationships with other allies to cut ties with China. That's not the goal of the United States, and we're not I think looking at this holistically, that essentially it's being viewed I think too narrowly, as in the sense that these as economic relationships with China are being given a disproportionate importance in terms of how they relate to the to U.S. alliances. And the U.S. is not asking any country to make a choice between trading with China or trading with the United States, and certainly is not going to think of South Korea or Japan, for example, as any less of an ally simply because they continue to trade with China. It's something separate to have a strong security relationship with the United States from continuing to trade with China. Because again, bottom line is the U.S. has a very strong, again, economic relationship with China, and so I think again, this has been sort of manipulated and misportrayed by Beijing to try and coerce U.S. allies in distancing themselves from their alliance commitments and distancing themselves from the United States, and it's really counterproductive, I think, to stable relations and positive relations in the region.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to turn to now Dr. Linan. First of all, if you would like to comment on the discussion we just had, but more specifically, you raised this point about the need for China and the support from China, if I understood you correctly, to develop a kind of crisis management mechanism on the Korean Peninsula. And can you see that China would be supportive and even, kind of gently pushing North Korea into implementing this comprehensive military agreement that was negotiated between North and South Korea some years ago?
Okay, thank you. Actually, I think inside China, a lot of voices think the alliance building run by the U.S. is a natural response for the U.S. as a hegemonic power. So China have to facing the challenges. Also, China can take stronger position during this challenges, because challenges for China's size also opportunity. Also, I think even China and the ROK has problem on that issue, but according to both countries, the statistic, the economic trade, the trade tide still be improved every year. And so China still want to taking the friendship with both Korea. And so alliance from Chinese eyes is okay for China's building a new stronger position. But also, I think the alliance still costs a lot, especially from US. And also the alliance cannot be taking a totally whole, and every countries in the alliance have their own interest, especially like Japan and ROK relationship. I don't think US can take in good management on this relationship. And so also their own have own interest. I don't think the US can make this a good alliance management very well. Secondly, as for your question, I think of course China right now has thinking really taking good position over the North Korea, but we kind of trying to how to say communicate very well and have a really strong political support each other recently. And but that it doesn't mean North Korea will listen to China on a lot of issues, especially on the issue related to their core interest. And but actually, China and both North Korea both believe the crisis management in Korean Peninsula. And that's why the last year you can see Kim Jong-un trying to hold there's some strap under the 3A parallel, and also the North Korean bombing the lines office in North Korea, and the Yanpingdao accident. So the Kim Jong-un is the one taking the last chance to stabilize the Korean Peninsula. Even Kim Jong-un wrote an apology letter to South Korea. So looks like China and North Korea have the same common position on the crisis management on Korean Peninsula. That is I think that is the both countries' common sense. And of course, China trying to persuade North Korea now to make another nuclear test, or ICBM test. Also, China wants North Korea to have their economy development and go into the international community. So I think during this period, we can communicate each other and trying to persuading North Korea, but it takes time, I think.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nan. We have some questions now from the audience, and I encourage you to pose more questions. I have one more for all our four panelists. Each one of you raised the issue, if I remember correctly, about some sort of arms control regime, confidence building measures, crisis management procedures, etc., etc. So, and this has been discussed not just now during our little short webinar, but for some time. And what do you see could be a start of such a process? How do we initiate, and how do we get all the major actors on board on such a rather ambitious, or at least a very important issue, signing up to starting talking about some form of arms control, confidence building, risk reduction? Do you have any ideas on how is this likely in line with the policy of the countries you represent, or in your own thinking, if I may say so? And how do we kind of kickstart such a process? So maybe if you could start, Mr. Zucchini. Put you on the spot there.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. It's a very tough question, actually. So I don't have any realistic idea how we can kick off the communication among stakeholders. But one idea is that, is it possible to organize some dialogue 1.5 track? I mean the dialogue with working level or some general discussion among more technical level, maybe hosted by think tank or something like that, because we felt that top summit level dialogue between US and North Korea. And I understand that North Korea has been communicating closely with Beijing, but I don't see any sign that they can deliver some new steps. So that's why I think that some kind of 1.5 track would be working, but I'm not sure. So, sorry. Yeah, very difficult question.
Mr. Garlauskas, do you have any ideas on this?
Well, first of all, I recommend to everyone that they read your article related to this subject, because I believe it was last year that you published that on the ISDP website. I think there were some good ideas in there, but I think the key starting point is to recognize the biggest obstacle to this this sort of mechanism is going to be North Korea. The reference earlier to how the North Koreans literally blew up the liaison office, I think, is a very important one. In that, I think there has to be a recognition that you establish this sort of mechanism, really with the central hope being that the United States, you know, and its allies can have this sort of mechanism, this sort of consultation going on with China, and then basically show to the North Koreans, hey, you can either you know, be a part of the agenda for discussion, or you can be a part of the discussion, right? But I think the you know, at the end of the day, this sort of mechanism is going to have to be something that's going to is, you know, as we just heard, something that's going to be approached sort of slowly, carefully, and gradually. And the more it seems like a dramatic sort of new initiative, the more likely it is to receive some sort of opposition, or there be concerns about you know, what it's going to mean about going too far too fast, or these sorts of things. And so I do think a gradual approach is important, and I think an approach that recognizes the North Koreans you know, will probably not be on board in the beginning, because it's in their interest actually to not have this sort of mechanism, I think, in some ways, because the less concern there is about the potential for conflict, then the harder it is for the North Koreans to ramp up those tensions and be provocative in a way that suits their interest and their strategy, right? So I think there's going to be you know, some again, some initial opposition from Pyongyang, and if you want to establish that mechanism, you got to be willing to take some flack from Pyongyang, and the question is Beijing going to be willing to do that? That would be my concern. And so you establish these sorts of mechanisms and processes, and you offer them to North Korea, and if they rebuff you or they claim that this is all part of a hostile plan, then you just kind of shrug it off and you have to continue, right? And keep encouraging them to join and not lose hope. But it's something, again, that to go back to the beginning, it has to be approached gradually. And I think the key is again, being able to establish that dialogue with China at some level, because to me, that's the miscalculation I fear the most, is that there's a confrontation that emerges in and around the peninsula, say, in a crisis where it leads to a conflict with China that doesn't need to happen. I think this mechanism as a starting point could really focus on avoiding that possibility.
Thank you, Mr. Garlauskas. Professor Hahn, do you have any ideas on how we could get something rolling like this?
I have two quick suggestions. One is for China. I think China next year, maybe President Xi Jinping will enter the second decade of rule, and China will have some need for showing a vision of the world. Having said that, you are pursuing China dream and strong army dream, but in the next decade you have to show some kind of vision for peaceful and prosperous world. Then in that sense, you have to show how to materialize peaceful and prosperous world with China's leadership to show how to achieve that. So in that connection, you can think about realization of a new concept of security, new security to show the steps to approach that kind of thing. And another thing is, having been here, I thought about how to UN authorize a commission to think about missile arms race in the world. And in 1982, United Nations authorized the Palme Commission to think about a new concept of security in overcoming the Cold War divide. And as a result of that, common security concept was proposed, and it did very much a positive role in unleashing the demise of Cold War. So I think some kind of Palme Commission with Sweden in it, UN Commission should be launched, I think. That is to see the global problems, security problems from a holistic perspective.
Thank you, Professor Ahn. There was one very concrete example in the end. Dr. Nan, do you have any advice on how to move forward?
Oh, thank you. I think according to North Korean logic, if they want to rejoin the talk, it should have the most there should be a most good atmosphere for the talk. But from North Koreans' eyes perspective, right now there's no atmosphere, and the U.S. still taking the policy, no sanction lift up, and still the military access there, and so for North Koreans' perspective, there's no good atmosphere for the talk. Why they go back to talk, and also they think if they think that the world is becoming the new Cold War, and they're just taking the side of the China and the Russian side, and so they don't need to talk to Americans. They still can survive, and I don't think the objective for North Korea is to make the world accept North Korea as a nuclear state. I think the objective is still very clear: the survival of the regime, and so right now they taking the position as. So if the world is a Cold War, new Cold War, so they should be in the one side of right now there's the opposition of the US side. So if we want to produce the talk and getting North Korean back to the table, so we have to right now we have to create the atmosphere for the talk. And from Chinese perspective, so United States should make the first step, and China proposed the step-by-step and the double track proposal for the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula. And right now, US, I don't think there's any specific plan for Biden administration on the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, and no any passage for the sanction lift up. What kind of the sanction they can argue, they can discuss with the United States. And from Chinese side, this is only the alliance over the denuclearization. So how make this mechanism happen? I don't know. So probably I don't think right now is a good time for us to resume the talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lina. I now have a couple of questions from our attendees. I'll try to put them together two and two, and we have about 10 minutes before we have to end our interesting discussion. First, it's a follow-up on this about possible arms control from Dr. Sang-Soo Lee. And maybe it's to you, Professor Han, that there is a concern that the framework of arms control can allow North Korea to promote a nuclear arms reduction instead of full denuclearization, And how do you view this problem? And also maybe Mr. Garlaukos would like to comment on that one. Another one is from Elisabeth Ferrido Bolin. It has always seemed to me that North Korea, under whose leadership in the past been the enfant terrible of China, who is financing or backing up North Korea's aggressive nuclear experiments when its population titters on the bank of hunger. So maybe for you, Dr. Nan, so please over to you first, Professor Hon.
Oh yes, I know what Dr. Sang-Soo Lee is talking about. In resuming the denuclearization talks with North Korea, and people in Korea and United States are suggesting a step-by-step arms control approach to address the threat perception of each side. That if you adopt arms control approach, then that is as if to disregard the total elimination of North Korean nuclear weapons. That is kind of pros and cons of arms control approach. So I think once the negotiation starts, it can address all kinds of issues. So we need not to have some prejudgment of the negotiated outcome. That's the first one. And second one is, I'm talking about the regional arms control, especially about regional missile arms control, in which United States and China and Russia should involve in. So this is a different arms control, regional arms control, which is different from denuclearization arms control approach. Thank you.
Mr. Garlaukos, do you want to comment on this one, the risk of diluting the denuclearization end?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's possible to maintain a principled commitment to denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula fully, to seeing North Korea completely abandon its nuclear and ballistic missile programs, but to do so without undermining the possibility for some sort of interim agreements and limited progress toward that goal. The perfect should not become the enemy of the good, right? And I think, and in practicality, I think the United States has in the past expressed its openness, to this sort of approach. It's not, I think it's been exaggerated how much that there's this focus on sort of a grand bargain or a one-shot deal or something like that. I don't think in actuality that's the case. The key thing is it can't be an interim agreement that then ends up becoming the new status quo permanently, right? As long as there's a continued commitment to working toward full denuclearization, I think then a so-called arms control approach. And I think part of it is the phrasing of the arms control terminology makes people think of the New START or something like that, of between the truly major nuclear powers, or it makes people think of the Cold War arms control constructs. But I think there's a way to come to an agreement that in some way limits and starts to roll back North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities, that it could make progress toward that goal of denuclearization that wouldn't undermine it. But I do understand the fear, and I also would have that concern if you had a framework that essentially locked in North Korea as nuclear armed with just some limitations on what it can field or what it can test or something like that. I think that would be very problematic. So it would have to be viewed as sort of an interim step. I think that would be the best approach.
Thank you very much. May I ask Dr. Lee Nan if you would please comment, and maybe I'll let you as well comment, Mr. Zucchini, on this. Who or how is North Korea financing its arms buildup in the midst of this rather difficult economic situation?
Sorry, the signal is not so clear in China. Can you repeat your question again? Thank you.
Yes. it was a question from one of our attendees. It has always seemed to me that North Korea, under whose leadership in the past been the enfant terrible of China, who is financing or backing up North Korea's aggressive nuclear experiments when its population is on the brink of hunger? And who or how is North Korea financing its kind of military buildup?
Okay, so actually there's one thing that I have to correct. So I've been in North Korea a lot of time. I have 3 times each year before the coronavirus. And I don't think North Korea right now on the brink of the hunger. And I think I went to the local often, and I think that their living condition is going better. I cannot see they succeed the economy, but definitely they can survive. And so right now, during the coronavirus, everybody knows North Korea is experiencing the very hard economic situation. But I still believe North Koreans, there's no big food problem in North Korea, especially local, because they have policies on the food distribution. And also the last year, Russian have the food assistance to North Korea. So that's why I don't think North Korea right now still on the brink of the hunger. And second one, I think who backing North Korea's military experiment? I think usually in the past they have several channels, and but during with the sanction, the stronger and stronger, and there are a lot of channels as cut. And but also I think the military technology sales, especially weapon sale, is very important for North Korea military to get the hard currency. And especially there's a military sales released by the CIA, and they sell them weapons to outside to get the currency. And so that is a very I think there's a main channel for military. But also I think China still keeping the main sanction, especially UN sanction toward North Korea. That's why I can hear a lot of North Korean complaining about China because they think China-North Korean relationship is getting better, but China still cutting the big assistance to North Korea, especially in North Korea. The biggest issue is the heavy industry, and China still, if you look at the report run by the commercial department of China, they still keep the sanction, UN sanction, very strongly to not to give any material to raw material to North Korea. And there's no military assistance between China and the US and North Korea. Oh, there's no military access between two countries. So China still keep the main UN sanction very clearly. And I went to North Korea, China border recently, and still there's talking to the official local. They still keep the sanction very, very, very strictly. So that is, I think, that is showing. So still, China still want North Korea to drop the nuclear power. Also, China still want to the multilateral approach to achieve the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula. Especially, China still want to keep the cooperation with other countries on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nan. Our clock is ticking, and I would like to give you an opportunity to have a last kind of intervention. And I'll do that by framing one of the questions from our attendees. It's Emilia Lau. And one of her questions is, what do you think is the greatest challenge to peace and stability of Northeast Asia in the long term? Are DPRK nukes the only concern, or do you think there are others? So with that question, and if you have any final comments, and try to be as brief as possible, I would like to do a tour of the four of you. So please, over to you, Mr. Garlokas first.
Yeah, so I don't think North Korean nuclear weapons are the only concern, but I think they are the primary driver of risk in Northeast Asia. And I think North Korea's continued weapons development, not just on the nuclear front, but also of increasingly diverse and capable conventional weapon systems, could combine with U.S.-China strategic rivalry to embolden North Korea to think that it can escalate its aggression and coercion to try and achieve its goals to secure the regime and expand its influence and lock itself in as a nuclear armed state. I think that would be the riskiest sort of overall challenge that we are most likely to face. And I think it's also related very closely to this concern I have about the Chinese economic coercion, the PRC economic coercion, and the potential for U.S. PRC strategic rivalry to develop into a more direct military confrontation, in part because of that Chinese muscle flexing in the region. So I think all of these are interconnected, but it all comes back to, I think, the nuclear issue in North Korea is the greatest single driver. It just, there's a lot of other related elements.
Thank you very much. And I'll give Mr. Zucchini the next word. If you have any final comments, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think the DPRK nuclear is only concern in the region either. This is a kind of the mixed message combined with the competition in the other region between US and China. But clearly the nuclearization of the North Korea triggers arms race in the region. So Japan may increase the defense budget in the future, and China as well, and the US strengthen the strategic partnership other to increase the military capability in the Indo-Pacific. Such military race is the most worried and the biggest concern to maintain the regional stability in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, over to you, Dr. Nan.
It's a big question, but
Yeah.
I think the leaders in Northeast Asia have narrow-mindedness to national interest, and we don't know how to live together peacefully with specific measures to be agreed upon. And that means rule of law and rules-based order. We didn't create it. The NPT is very important to ensure the contemporary international order and security. But the value of NPT was given by United States and former Soviet Union and big powers. Having said that, China is not acting as a kind of a responsible NPT rulers of the NPT regime, and North Korea. So I think leaders in Northeast Asia have to have open-minded and kind of take measures through cooperative security where countries can live peacefully together. That is leadership. Leadership has to be changed, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. You will have the last word, Dr. Linan, please.
Thank you. I think compared with the North Korean nuclear problem, I think the arms race in this region is still very important for us, especially US trying to do make the AUKUS, and you know, the Australia can get the nuclear submarine, and so showing to China. So this is a kind of the follow by rule or follow by norm. Or so for North Korea, of course they have a legitimate reason to believe they should hold the nuclear. So that's why I think the all party in these regions should reduce this tension and reducing the arms race recently. Thank you.
So thank you very much, all panelists, and also thank you to our online attendees. And on behalf of ISDP and the Korea Defense Veterans Association, I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation and for sharing your expertise and for having a very stimulating discussion and debate on a subject that I think we will have to revisit over and over and over again before we have something what we would call a peaceful and stable Northeast Asia region. So with that, today's event is closed, and I thank you and have a good day or a good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.